What's up, y'all? This is John and Mike back for another episode of the Nothing Finer podcast. As always, you can find us on Millions and as a part of the Fans First Sports Network. Tonight, we are talking to John Chancey of Rubbin' the Rock to help us with the 2024 Clemson Tigers preview as part of our Puncher's Chance series. But before we get to that, how have y'all been and what are you drinking?
I've been well. I just got back from vacation. We kind of talking a little bit about that when we got on here. I was visiting a family up north in Detroit for about 2 weeks. So I mean, it was nice to be around positivity and people that want to see and hang out and do all the activities and stuff. So I mean, it was really cool to go up there and do all the things that we used to do and all that and see family that we don't see very often. But as far as what I'm drinking, I just have water. I've did a little bit too much while we were up there. Everything's legal in Michigan, so I'm I'm good now. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I'm drinking on this Knob Creek single barrel I picked up last week. Time's not real. I don't know when I got this thing. The last time we recorded is when I opened it. I don't remember when that was. But it's good. After I got out of the neck pour like I was talking about in the last episode, it definitely opens up for a lot of peanut and vanilla, which I always love that in a good bourbon. John, what about you?
I have a an IPA from Highwire called Slam Dank.
Okay.
First time I've had it. It's pretty good. I like it.
All right, John, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners a little bit?
Sure. I am a Clemson grad, 1997, and I live just outside Charlotte, and so I've been close by to the university. Tried to stay as involved as I can, and a few years back decided to make writing a hobby and was able to turn that hobby into a little bit of a side hustle and do it a little bit more seriously. So I'm not it's not the job that pays the bills, but it's something I've gotten into pretty heavy here in the last few years.
I hear that.
Uh,
That's kind of the same way we are. It's a labor of love, and our big thing is we just want to talk sports and talk to people like you that bring other perspectives into it because a lot of people get caught into only listening to stuff about their team, and if we can make somebody the most informed person at a tailgate, that's kind of our goal.
And that sounds good to me.
Right?
oh, I'm sorry. We're good. Okay. All right. So before we get into 2024, we need to address a couple of burning questions that we have just to get it out of the way so we can get to the more positive, outlook. Reason why we're here today. But did the 2021 game against Georgia give DJU the permanent yips? Because it feels like it.
That's as good a theory as I've heard, because it fits all of the evidence at hand. Uh, the, we haven't seen the guy that showed up in South Bend, Indiana in 2020, with maybe one exception of a shootout he got into with Sam Hartman at Wake in 2022. Both games were double overtime, and he threw all over the yard. Otherwise, yeah, after that Georgia game, he seemed to be a completely different person, and it's still a head scratcher most Clemson fans can't wrap their head around because to this day, on the list of all-time single all-time passing yards in a single game, the top two spots belong to Deshaun Watson, and number three is DJ Uyunglele at Notre Dame in 2020. Um, he threw more yards in that game than Trevor Lawrence did in any game that he played ever at Clemson. Uh, I don't know how to reconcile that with what we saw, in 2021 and 2022. So yeah, either Georgia broke him or his offensive line broke him. One of those two.
Yeah, he's like that South Bend that Notre Dame game in 2020 was like a 99 overall if they had the EA Sports college football game. If they just had like a card for him for that, he's like the perfect player. That scared the crap out of me. That's all I thought of when Georgia was getting ready to play Clemson and in Charlotte to start the 21 season was I don't want to see that guy that hot. And we didn't see
And
it,
and
luckily for
little
us.
did we
Didn't.
know, we barely saw any offense.
Correct.
Right.
I mean, that
And
was
seven.
such a strange game. I mean, and to think if Georgia had actually started Stetson Bennett, maybe it would have been better. But who knew at the time?
Hmm.
I don't even know if Stetson knew at the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure either. But it's so when it comes to DJ, the one thing I think most objective Clemson fans have concluded is he's not a bad quarterback. He's a good quarterback. He's never going to be a great quarterback. He's an 8 or 9 win quarterback, and so he's always going to have a place to play. And under the circumstances, I'm not sure that I could blame Florida State for giving it a try. They needed somebody, so we'll see how it goes for him this year. But ultimately, what we saw last year at Oregon State was not that different from what we saw in 2022. It just maybe the trend was a little bit different. He started off hot. He started off really well, and then things kind of went downhill as they started playing better teams at the end. So we'll see how it goes for him this year.
So why doesn't Dabo show more of his personality like he did in the spring game this past year? Because I'll be honest, I didn't understand the Dabo hype. I didn't understand why players liked him. And then I watched that spring game and it just clicked. Like his on the field commentary, which is essentially what it was so much fun to watch that spring. I went through and watched every spring game of every opponent Georgia was playing this year. The Clemson one was the only game I enjoyed because he's fun.
He's made that kind of his thing. He's been doing that. I want to. I think he started doing that after the first national championship in 2016. So the 2017 spring game, where he would be mic'd up and would be talking to the commentators as they were calling the game, and he's made that his own. And every year that I think that's one of the places publicly you get to see the most personality because he lets the rest of his staff do the work that day. He may run up and say something to the guys or give them a little bit of coaching on the field at the time if he sees something at the moment. But otherwise, he signs a head coach for each team. They split up the staff. They're responsible for the guys, and he gets to go have his fun that day. That's kind of like his play day. So that's I think where you see a lot of the personality come through. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that when you follow Clemson and you watch him a lot more than most people probably outside the box or outside the Clemson Nation do, we see a lot of that personality, and I think it shines through a little bit more, especially when he's doing like the after game press conference on Tuesdays, where some of the pressure of the game has subsided and he can relax a little bit more. You get to see a little bit more of him in that situation.
All right, so let's talk about the 2023 season just a little bit. So I'm going to just rattle off some stats for anybody that didn't follow them too closely, I should say. So last year, Clemson was 52nd in points per game on offense. I think it was just a hair under 30 points a game. 31st in points allowed, so defense still really good, even without Brent Venables there. But their losses include at Duke to start the season, which was tough. The home game against Florida State, and then on the road against NC State and Miami. And I I think the Miami one probably hurts the most just because they're
Yeah,
Miami, not in a good way. They beat Kentucky in the really crazy Gator Bowl 38-35 to finish the season 9-4. Kate Klubnik had an up and down season in his first full year as a starter under Garrett Riley. First time having him as coordinator there as well. 2,844 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 9 picks. So like I was saying, one of the reasons why we're talking about Clemson today is because we think they're going to have a great chance to improve from that 8-win regular season and then obviously 9 with the bowl. And just some other stats here real quick. So according to Bud Elliott's blue chip ratio that just came out the other day or even today, I think. The percentage of the roster that are 4 and 5 stars recruited out of high school. Clemson is 10th in the country at that, checking in at 64% of 4 and 5 star recruits over that 4-year cycle. Just for reference, Georgia's at 80%, and then Ohio State's at 90, which is mind-boggling. And then according to Bill Connolly's returning production stat, which he probably needs to tweak a little bit with the transfer portal, although again that doesn't really impact Clemson all that much. But 79% on offense return for the Tigers, which is good for 20th in the country, and then 49% of the defense returns, which is good for 103rd out of 134. So with all that said, kind of going into this season, what are the coaches' approval ratings amongst the fan base?
Well, when it comes to Dabo, I think that it's pretty consistent across the fan base that they like Dabo. I think that they appreciate Dabo, they respect Dabo. You know, where it's split is his perspective on how he builds the roster of the team. Um, and there's still a lot of people out there who just very generally say, "Oh, well, he doesn't use an IL. He doesn't use the transfer portal." Neither of which is true. Clemson has an average amount of budget for NIL. They're not Tennessee. They're not Miami. They're not going to be able to throw money around all over the place, but they have an average amount of NIL. And although they did not use the transfer portal in the first few seasons, they did start to use it sparingly in a minor way. They've grown into wanting to use it more. The problem with Dabo is he's been very specific about this lately. He will not use NIL for acquisition. He will only use it for retention, meaning he wants people to commit to Clemson for reasons other than NIL, other than money. His perspective, his theory is that if they're coming here for reasons other than money, then they're more likely to stay. And he's right in that regards. In addition to Clemson not having any transfers coming in this year, they also have one of the best retention rates in the country. They lose a lot fewer players. Players who leave Clemson are typically the guys that are just stuck on the depth chart and they can't make their way up. When you have younger guys come in who play very well right away, some of the older guys as they're juniors and seniors and they're graduating, they want to move on and find some playing time. There are exceptions, but most of them fall into that category. So, you know, the fan base is split because honestly, like a lot of Southeastern schools, Clemson's fan base is relatively conservative in nature. So most of them don't like NIL. They want football to be the way it was 15, 20 years ago. So a lot of them like the way Dabo runs the team. The other half are frustrated simply because it's not that we don't trust Dabo and believe that he's doing what he thinks is right. It just feels like he's not utilizing all of the resources at his command. And, he's got one of the best retention rates in the country. He's got one of the best graduation rates in the country. He's doing a lot of things that are really good. Right now, what it's not doing is translating into improvement in the program. And that's where he's got to change things because since 2018, when they won their last national championship, Clemson has taken a step backwards every single since then, except one time. So out of 5 seasons, one time they improved from 2021 to 2025. I'm sorry, 2022. The other 4 years, they took a step back. They're never taking a big step back. They went from winning the national championship in 2018 and 15-0 to being 14-1 in 2019. Then 10-2, so only 2 losses, one more loss in the COVID year. Then in 2021, went to 3 losses. And that's where it really felt like things fell off the map because at 3 losses, no, you're no longer getting into the playoffs. You're not winning the conference championship. It felt bigger. The drop off felt bigger than it really was. It was really only one game. And then, of course, from 2022 to 2023, drop back another game. He needs to turn that around and start taking steps forward. He doesn't have to win the national title next year. A lot of fans would really prefer to see this team go at least 10-2 this year. He just needs to show that all those other things that he's doing that are good that he can point at can result in a team that's improving and taking steps towards getting back into contention for national honors and playoff berths.
So moving into the offense just a little bit, how big of a jump do you expect Cade Klubnik to take this season? We talked about his 2023 stats just a minute ago.
Jump is not the right word. Maybe a hop, a skip. I expect Cade to be better And this is something I actually wrote about a few days ago. He was one of the counselors at the Elite 11 competition that they just had for the class of 2025 out in California, and he won the Elite 11 competition when he was a rising senior. And that thrusted him up to, I think he ended up being sixth overall in the nation in the 247 composite and the number one ranked quarterback in that class because Quinn Ewers had reclassified and went ahead to college. Um, when he got back in that environment, there were some videos of him at the Elite 11 as a counselor running through some of the drills, and you saw exactly why he won it. When he's in the underwear Olympics, he is a really, really, really good quarterback. His problem is what's going to happen when he's got 11 guys on the other side of the field rushing at him, and his offensive line is not exactly the best in the world, and he's got to make decisions. He makes bad decisions, and he started off the year in that game against Duke. Just every time he got under pressure, he made a quick decision. DJ's problem was that he was too slow to make up his mind. Cade has no problem making up his mind. He makes it up wrong at least half the time. Now he got better as the year went on, and part of that had to do with a change to the offensive line. As a small aside, you know, Clemson traditionally ran a straightforward north-south blocking scheme. Rarely right to left movement on the offensive line. Garrett Riley came in and he has a lot of pulling in his offense. Through the first 8 games last year, Clemson just couldn't do it. They could not manage to pull. We knew it was going to be rough to begin with. They came out and after a few games, it looked like against Florida State, that was a relatively good game. And against Syracuse next week, they looked like they were getting better. And then the close one against Wake, those 2 losses on the road to Miami and NC State, y'all already referred to, they were pathetic. Clemson fans were taking clips of the offensive line trying to pull and tripping over each other and putting the Benny Hill theme music to it and putting it on YouTube. It was a laughing stock. And so after they were 4-4, they changed things up and went back to a more straight north-south philosophy. They said it was because of injuries on the line. It wasn't. It's because they couldn't do what they were supposed to be able to do. I mean, there's a reason that Matt Luke is the new offensive coordinator now. It's because the guy who was here before, Thomas Austin, bless him, he's a Clemson man. He couldn't teach him how to pull. Once they stopped trying to do that and they kind of modified the offense to fit a north-south blocking scheme, suddenly against Notre Dame, Phil Maffa runs for 180 yards. When Will Shipley comes back, he runs for over 100 yards. The running game gets going. Suddenly, the defense has to respect the running game, and Cade Klubnik all of a sudden has a lot more time to make decisions, and he's not as under much pressure. And just the offensive line, they played better. I mean, when they got more confidence, they felt better in the running game. They started blocking better in the passing game too. So you saw all of that is to explain that as the year went on, you saw Cade start to make better decisions. He started to get more comfortable. I expect that to continue, but he is who he is. He's not going to suddenly become. He's not going to take a Joe Burrow leap. He is. He's a guy who, if he sticks around until he's a senior, by the time he's a senior, he may have a Jordan Travis like impact on the team as a senior. But it's not. There's not going to be a jump. He needs the rest of the team around him to improve. And so, like I've already said, Matt Luke's come in. He's working with the offensive line. We can't expect them to come right out of the gate against Georgia and start blocking like his offenses did. Riley's offenses did at TCU when they had that wonderful year. It's going to take a little bit of time, so it's going to continue to be a crescendo. I expect, Cade's going to get better at what he does. But what he also needs is he needs that offensive line to get better. He needs some of the young talent that's coming in on offense to get acclimated and start playing and helping him out. And as that happens, he will continue to play better. But it's not going to be a leap. It's going to be a continual improvement over time.
Yeah, the Matt Luke edition, I don't think it's talked about nearly enough. Like he's a hell of an offensive line coach. Maybe not a head coach, but he knows what he's doing there.
Oh well, it's getting talked about a lot in Clemson. I can guarantee
Yeah.
you that.
Hmm.
And so, like I said, Thomas Austin was a guy that a lot of people respected. He was a Clemson grad. Um, but in addition to the problems last year, he also had some misses in recruiting. That there were some very good in-state recruits in South Carolina, and everybody knew not all of them were going to go to Clemson. There was one that was pretty much a lock for South Carolina, but everybody felt that Clemson should get at least one or two of those guys, and they all ended up going to the Gamecocks. And then there were some other guys around that it looked like Clemson was in on, and things looked good, and then suddenly, no, they pull the trigger for Tennessee. No, they pull the trigger for Georgia. It's you know he missed out on some guys in recruiting, and that hurt too. So Matt Luke, yeah, he's getting a lot of attention, especially on the recruiting trail, because he's as you guys probably know, there's this guy David Sanders up in Charlotte that everybody would love to have on their team come 2025, and everybody's trying to get hold of him, and he's working hard on that. I expect Matt Luke's going to make a difference for this line. I just don't know if it's simply improved coaching is going to be what gets them over the hump. I think it probably is going to take a class or two to really for him to really be able to do what he was hired to do, which is to transform the Clemson offensive line into being something that is a strength for the team. That throughout all the success we've had over the last decade, offensive line has never been one of those things. We've never had. I think the highest drafted offensive lineman was a second rounder, um, and that was Jackson Carman a couple years ago to the Cincinnati Bengals. Um, so, and all the draft picks we've had over the last decade, not a single one of them, not a single one of the first round picks was from the offensive line. Matt Luke has been brought in here to do that, and he's attacking it. Man, I tell you, he is all over the place. So I can see why Georgia liked him so much. He's already sold himself to Clemson fans.
Hmm. So what
So
offense? Oh, go ahead.
I got a question. Quarterback room. So, like I said a minute ago, I watched the spring game. I really like the way that Trent Pearman played the position. Is there
Yes.
any quarterback competition, or is he in the waiting room for something bad or Cade to move on?
I Trent Pearman is one we're just going to have to wait and see. He is Clemson's Stetson Bennett. He's a walk on.
Yeah.
Um, he went to Daniel High School here I'm not in Clemson, but it's in Clemson. And the story with Daniel High School is all the in addition to all the Clemson coaches coming here, they bring their sons who are really good at football. So for example, we've had two Venables who went on scholarship who played at Daniel High School, who are one of whom is still with Clemson. Um, of course Dabo's sons all played at Daniel. Daniel wins state championship at their level in South Carolina every 3 out of 4 years because not only are the coaches bringing their kids in, but all these big hog molly offensive linemen and defensive linemen who come to Clemson and don't go pro, they stay in Clemson and their hog molly children go and play for Daniel, and they just push people all over the field. Um, and that's where Pearman came from. His dad, Danny Pearman, was a coach for Dabo at Clemson for several years. He's moved on to the support staff now, so he's in an analyst role. But he's like a lot of the other kids who sons of the coaches. He's come on. He's a walk on. He, by all accounts, is a really good quarterback. He just doesn't have the measurables. He's not tall enough. He's not fast enough. He's not big enough to make anybody really uh, go ooh and ah. But as you saw in that spring game, he was the best quarterback on the field in April. And that's not to say that I don't think it's fair to say that there's a quarterback competition, or at least a starting quarterback competition. I think there's a very good quarterback competition for being for Klubnik's backup. Chris Fazina is a highly rated guy that just hasn't shown us anything on the field yet. He's going to be a redshirt freshman, so he's got time. But I think Pearman's in the position that a lot of people wanted Cade Klubnik to be in a few years ago with DJU. Whereas if Cade goes out there and he does not improve and he starts making some of those silly errors that he made in 2023, yeah, I think that there's going to be eventually um, the pressure from the fan base, and I think Dabo will feel the need to make a change and try something different. Dabo's a patient coach, especially the quarterbacks. He's good with making sure that he keeps their head in the best place possible. And I think that was one of the big problems with DJ. DJ was just a guy that let things get inside his head. Once something went wrong, it was a domino effect. It kept going wrong. Um, I said, a minute ago, Cade doesn't handle pressure on the field very well. He handles every other type of pressure really, really well. That's probably the way he's most like Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence is he will stand up and he will sit in front of an entire room of people with microphones and cameras flashing in his face, and he will own it, and he will project confidence and do everything he needs to do to show that he can handle the pressure. But I think eventually, if things don't go well this year, yeah, you'll see Trent Pierman, and then we'll have to see how that goes because I look good in a spring game. I've seen lots of guys look good in spring games that I never saw again, or when they got in the game, they just got destroyed. So we'll have to see how that goes. But I don't think that they're going to put Trent Pierman in unless Clemson's way ahead or Cade just becomes a complete disaster.
Hmm. So we already talked about some of the offensive weaknesses. You talked about the offensive line. Hopefully that gets better with Matt Luke there. But what are some offensive players that we need to look out for this season?
Well, I think the two primary guys, the seniors that Clemson needs to play well if they're going to have a good season offensively, and I don't mean elite, but I mean good enough that along with the defense playing well that they can win double-digit games. Those two guys are Phil Maffa and Jake Briningstool. He's the feature back now. Shipley's off to the NFL. And like I said a minute ago, there were a lot of people last year who felt that probably Phil was playing better than Shipley most of the year. That may have been just due to circumstances, injuries. When Shipley got hurt and they made that change to the offensive blocking scheme, like I said, Phil ran for 180 yards. It was like the heavens opened up, and it was an amazing thing. And so there's a lot of people who have high expectations for him this year. He's going to need that line to block for him, but Clemson definitely needs, and Cade definitely needs him to run well because there's not a lot of experience on the depth chart behind him. The next guy is Keith Adams. He's more of a old school fullback bowling ball kind of guy. And there's a couple very young guys who've got some potential, but really haven't seen him much. So we're hoping Maffa stays healthy and he plays well. And then Brian Stoll, he got off to a slow start last year. I don't know if it was just he wasn't grasping Riley's system, or he was focused on trying to be a better blocker. It took up through the first half of the season for him to come alive. And in that Miami game, as bad as most of the team was against Miami, Browning still had a career night against Miami, and he was about the only guy that Cade could find that would catch the ball. So we need that Jake Browning-Stool throughout the year. The wide receiver room, there's some good wide receivers. There's not guys right now who have blown anybody's doors off. They need Jake Browning-Stool to be that home run hitter, pass catcher. So those are the two guys I would point out that have the most potential to make the biggest impact, and Clemson really needs them to make that impact.
Hmm.
For wide receivers, I cannot remember the name. And I just tried to go through the roster and nothing rang a bell. He was the true freshman that did well in the spring game. I want to say he was
You're talking
number
about the early
5.
enrollee?
Yes.
Yeah, that was Brian Wesco.
Yes. He really impressed me with his speed and his body control, but if he can put together with high pointing the football and running a little bit cleaner routes, he will be. I think he is that guy. Like he's got all the tools to be that guy.
Yeah. Well, and if you're talking about the newcomers, the two newcomers on offense that Clemson um, really, really hopes acclimate quickly and can get involved in the offense would be Bryant Wesco, and another freshman, TJ Moore. Wesco was an early enrollee. He did play well in the spring game. The best play of the day was a touchdown pass from Trent Pierman to Bryant Wesco, and it was kind of a diving catch. It was really impressive. Um, he was the higher rated of the two through most of the 2024 cycle. TJ Moore got into one of the All-Star games towards the end of the cycle and really impressed when he got up against some guys, elite talent, and he stood out. But he's a summer enrollee. I think he actually just moved in last week. So he didn't get the benefit of spring practice, whereas Wesco did. Wesco's main disadvantage probably to start, he's a slight guy. He even with pads on, he looks like a stiff breeze to blow him over. He needs to put on it, and that's the way. That's what Dabo always says about some of these guys. We got to put a little bit of junk in their trunk. He needs to put on, and he said the same thing about Cade when he got here. He needs to put on a little weight because he legitimately is a threat to get injured if he doesn't get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. But I don't think that's going to keep him off the field. I think that he's going to get his opportunities. TJ Moore, once he gets used to things, he'll get his opportunities. Clemson, like I said a minute ago when it came to Browningsville, Clemson needs a guy who can take the top off the defense. They don't have that guy. Antonio Williams is a really good wide receiver, and he was injured much of last year. Um, Tyler Brown. I always want to call him Troy Brown. That's the wrong name. Tyler Brown was a really big surprise last year. He was a 3-star guy, came in and was immediately ready to play, and he did really well for Clemson last year. Those two guys are good receivers, and you match them up with Browningsville, you've got a good group of guys that, as long as Cade's making good decisions, you can matriculate the ball down the field. What they don't have yet is a guy that can go deep. And they're really hoping either Wesco or Moore can turn into that guy. I think Moore is actually probably going to be the one who's going to be more of the high point guy. I think Wesco's the one they hope that, like you said, could run the really crisp routes and put the speed on, put a juke on somebody, and leave them in the dust and get wide open down the field.
So
So,
what are oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna ask about the defense now. So what are some defensive players that we need to be on the lookout for?
Well, the first guy that comes to mind is Barrett Carter. And he was a guy that a lot of people didn't think would be back this year, because both he and Jeremiah Trotter were on the NFL's radar at the beginning of the year, but something didn't go right. I don't know. Barrett was dreadful in that Duke game. He was getting outrun by those Blue Devil kids who probably at their best couldn't come close to his speed. He admitted it after the game. He said, "Yeah, something's wrong. I was just flat out beat by those guys." And so he, like Browningstool, he started off slow. He got better through the year. What really got his attention was he got to the end of the year and he didn't like the grades he got back from the NFL. And he flat out said that. He said, "I wanted to go to the NFL, but I didn't like the feedback. So I'm back for another year." And man, you talk about crazy that Kentucky game was at the Gator Bowl. I mean, Barrett Carter showed us what it means to have a chip on his shoulder. He went out there and he had a game. He had, I can't remember if he forced a fumble or he recovered a fumble, but he got a fumble, and then also made a diving interception on a tipped ball. Went over the line and he jumped and dove and caught the ball. If he plays that way this year, the way he played in that game against Kentucky, he is going to be a first round draft pick at linebacker in the 2025 NFL draft. He's got to be the leader of the team. He's a senior. He's got to be the leader. He's got to be vocal. That was one of the drawbacks of Trotter. As good as he was not vocal. Carter's got a little bit more of an outgoing personality. He needs to be more vocal. The guy up front that I would point out would be Peter Woods. There's some good guys on the front, even though they put some guys into the NFL. They had 3 guys drafted off the line from last year. They got some good guys behind them, and that's why people are high on the Clemson defense, even though maybe Conley's returning production stats aren't that wonderful for the defense. The guys on the second string got a lot of respect from people. Pee-woo, though, we're not sure where he's going to play. He is a natural defensive tackle, and he got playing time, even though they had Tyler Davis and Ruka Ororo, who are both in the NFL now. He got a decent amount of playing time, but they toyed with playing him at defensive end I think they were worried that they weren't going to have somebody to put opposite TJ Parker, who was a really good freshman last year also. So we didn't get to see Piwu in that spring game. He came down with mono, of all things. Um, so he didn't get to we didn't get to see him play at defensive end. We don't know how that went in the spring, and so we don't know where he's going to play. But Clemson did this a few years ago with Christian Wilkins. He was a natural defensive tackle, but they needed somebody. One of the guys that they planned on playing at defensive end got injured, so they put Christian Wilkins out there, and he did well. So that may be a little bit of a wild card for the Clemson defensive line. And then in the secondary, it's Khalil Barnes. Um, one of the big losses this year for Clemson in the transfer portal was on Andrew Makuba, who was the starter last year at the what Clemson calls the nickel safety hybrid position, because they play more of a 4-2-5 these days than a 4-3-4. Um, Khalil Barnes was his backup, and I tell you what, by the end of the season, Khalil was getting just as much playing time as Andrew Makuba. So on the surface, you look and say, oh well, they lost a starter in Makuba. And Makuba's really good. He's going to be a good player for Texas this year. But the reality was Barnes, he was an all freshman, all American. I believe he was the freshman defensive player of the year in the ACC. So, I mean, the reality was if Makuba stayed here, he's probably going to have to play a different position because Barnes just really jumped out last year. He had two turnovers on back-to-back plays against South Carolina. And that's basically the reason Clemson won the game, because after that happened, neither offense did anything the rest of the night. Khalil Barnes basically won that game in Columbia single-handedly. There was a pass thrown behind the line of scrimmage that most of the Gamecocks didn't realize was a lateral. Khalil picked it up and ran it for a touchdown. And then the very next play, he intercepted Spencer Rattler and gave the ball back to Clemson. And that was pretty much it. So those three at each level are going to be the guys to keep an eye on for Clemson's defense, which, there's lack of experience in certain places. Like I said, Khalil's only a true sophomore. Piwu is a true sophomore. They may have as many as 5 starting true sophomores on that defense. They're talented, but there is a lack of experience in certain places. So, but those three are the ones to keep an eye on because they appear to be poised to have fantastic years.
So, going a little bit more in depth on the defensive weaknesses, I know you said lack of experience, but that secondary, from what I can remember, is a little depleted and dependent on some young guys. What are your expectations for that?
Well, yeah, you're right. Especially the cornerback position is going to be dependent on some young guys. Um, at safety, they do have a senior coming back, RJ Mickens, who is a pretty good player. Um, and then, like I said, Barnes is pretty much locked into that nickel safety hybrid position. The other three could be sophomores. Um, it looks like Avion Terrell is probably going to be the number one corner. He's a true sophomore. He's the brother of AJ Terrell, who plays for the Falcons now. Um, the other position is either going to be the true sophomore Shelton Lewis, or it's going to be the redshirt sophomore Jaden Lucas. Lucas has played well when he's gotten on the field, but he's going into his third year and he hasn't been able to complete a season yet. He's been injured both seasons, so health is a concern with him. Shelton Lewis showed a lot of good things last year as a rotational guy. He got in, he was the starter against Kentucky, and Devin Leary, he picked on him a little bit. He was a true freshman, and Leary was a experienced quarterback. He knew where to throw the ball, and he picked on Shelton Lewis a good bit. And Shelton Lewis had to do a little growing up in that game. By the end of it, he was the man who made the interception to seal Clemson's win. So yeah, the question is going to be, if Lewis is the other cornerback, are we going to get the confident guy who played well at times last year, or the guy that got picked on a little bit? It's going to be there's going to be a curve for Clemson, and so it applies to a lot of the young guys on defense, and it applies to some of the guys, the offensive line, and some of the young guys at wide receiver on offense. it's Clemson in game 7 and 8 should be a different team than the one we see coming out of the gate against Georgia, which is not a good thing for Clemson. Let's just face it. That's the one game on the schedule I would say, no, don't get too carried away, Clemson fans. Clemson's not going to be ready to handle Georgia in week 1. Now, if they play that game later in the season, it probably would be more competitive. But game 1, no, don't get your hopes up. It's going to take some time for these guys to gel.
All right. So, talking about kind of impact players, we talked about Wesco and Moore on offense. On defense, you have here mentioned Sammy Brown. We right before the early signing day, which is pretty much just the signing day now. I think we had talked about wanting to get Sammy Brown for a good 20 or 30 minutes, just talking about his
Correct.
highlights and all that. And when he committed to Clemson, we're like, God damn. And then when we saw him perform like that first play in the spring game, we're like, shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Sammy what do you kind of expect out of him this freshman year?
Well, so the feedback we got from the insiders after spring, after it was all said and done, was that, yeah, he looked fantastic in that spring game. Very, like you said, very first play, got the sack, and of course, not a real sack. They played two-hand touch with the quarterbacks, but he would have smoked the guy. He's going to be a player, but he admitted that when he first got there, as an early enrollee, his head was swimming. So
Mm.
what he showed you in the spring game is just what his natural abilities are, and as time goes by, he's going to grow, he's going to mature. And the good news is Clemson doesn't need him to be on the field right away. Like I said, they got Carter coming back, and then they also have Wade Woodaz, who is a guy who was unheralded. He was a 3-star, came in here, played safety in high school. They turned him into a linebacker, and he's been really good. He may not be as high on the NFL's radar, but he's a really good college linebacker. And like I said, they often play with 2 linebackers instead of 3 now. So the good news is Woodaz can play in the middle, and Carter's going to hold down the weak inside linebacker spot. Woodaz can play in the middle, but he can switch out if they want to put 3 linebackers on the field. He can switch out to the strong side linebacker position and bring Sammy in the middle. But Sammy looks like he's destined to be our future middle linebacker. He's going to see the field. He's one of those guys. They're not going to be able to keep him off the field. I mean, you've seen his. You guys followed him in recruiting. You've seen his stats. The guy was a one-man wrecking crew in high school. He was the running back, and he ran for, I mean, some insane number of yards. He was incredible on defense. He was the punter, and I mean, literally did everything. And that team was really good. He's a player. He's going to be on the field. But the good news is Clemson can be patient. He doesn't have to be out there on the field. It's a good situation to have, I think, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not going to lie. One of the things I put on my Christmas list this past year was a Sammy Brown wig. I've got a nice blonde Sammy Brown wig that I'm going to put on. The man, basically, if you look at him, he's Trevor Lawrence as a linebacker. That's what he is. He's a great football player. He's going to be an incredible pro one day, and he's got the most amazing, gorgeous blonde hair mullet ever. It's to die for.
One thing that every time I see Sammy Brown do anything on a football field, the one thing it reminds me of is going back 10, 15 years. There's an NFL commercial where they were talking about different players and positions, and Clay Matthews' position was just athlete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the long hair doesn't hurt the comparison.
Yeah. Oh no, I mean, and I have not heard anybody say that they're even entertaining the possibility of putting him at running back. But like I said a minute ago, there's not much behind Phil Maffa. So, I do wonder, hey, if Phil Maffa gets hurt and he's down and somebody doesn't step up back there, do you entertain doing that? Because the man had an insane number of yards as a running back in high school. I doubt that they would ever really entertain that, but it would be fun to see.
I
Hey,
would not want to tackle Sammy Brown.
there are worse ideas, like putting Justin Fields in for punt coverage. Um, there have
True.
been worse ideas played out on the football field.
Mhm.
The good news for Clemson is we got two pretty solid punters, I think. So I don't think we'll need him to punt. That's the one place I'm pretty certain we got it covered. But yeah,
Maybe a fake.
put the talent on the field where they play well, right?
Mhm.
You can't afford to keep a guy on the bench just because he's a freshman anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so let's get into the part that everybody we have on the show hates. Record prediction. I know it's tough. I know we know next to nothing about a lot of teams on the schedule quite yet, but we still have to ask.
Well, my answer right now is 9-3, which would be a one game improvement over 2023. Um, the reality, like I said a few minutes ago, I don't think it's very realistic to talk about the chances of Clemson defeating Georgia in the first game of the season at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Georgia's playing on another level right now compared to where Clemson is, especially on the offense. Um, Now, in that game, like we said earlier, the last time they met, they didn't score very much. I think they're going to score more, but I think the defenses are going to have a pretty good advantage in that game right off the bat because Georgia's got a few guys they're working into, and so especially on the offense, Georgia's offense is going to be way ahead of Clemson's for reasons we've already discussed. But I that's not going to be a shootout in my opinion. It's going to be a good game. It's going to be more scoring we saw before, but not a shootout. After Georgia, I think Clemson's perfectly capable of beating every other team on their schedule. The question is simply, will it come together for them? How long will it take for it to come together for them? And then the opponent, or will things come together for them? As I mentioned, it's going to take some time. So Georgia may need 2 or 3 games to really get that offense rolling, right? Clemson's probably going to need more like 4, 5, 6. The challenge for Clemson is 4 of their toughest 5 games, in my opinion, and people will argue with me over this, but 4 of the most difficult 5 games for Clemson are in the first half of the season, in the first 6.
Yeah.
Because
I'm
after
looking at the
Georgia,
schedule now. Yeah.
yeah, after Georgia, they host App State. Anybody who is a Power Five fan who isn't afraid of App State is a fool, or they're drinking way too many of these slam danks that I have right here. Um,
I grew up a Michigan fan, so we
yeah,
talked about we have a series right now where we talk about like the 2007 season. We go week by week, and of course we had to start off with the App State upset. But you know what?
yeah,
A&M lost at home to App State, so you can't, regardless of what level they're at, you can't take them lightly.
yeah, exactly. If you guys probably noticed, EA Sports just announced that they consider Kyle Field to be the toughest place to play, and it has the toughest rating. And the first thing I heard all day on the radio and on social media was it wasn't too tough for App, was it?
No, it's not.
Um, right. So I
And
mean
App
that
State is one of our, I mean, we ranked our top three group of five teams to make the 12 team playoff this year. And App State, I think, was number two on both of our lists.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're a good program year in year out. They can have their ups and downs for certain. I don't think this is quite as good as some of the best App teams. Clemson should win the game, but you can't take App lightly. And though it's a trap game. It's the second game of the season, and it's a trap game coming off of the Georgia game. And then now they have their first bye. This is one of those years where you get 2 byes. So they have their first bye after App State, but then they host NC State, who is a team that a lot of people are high on in the ACC. They got Grayson McCall from Coastal. They brought in one of these very highly rated wide receivers from Ohio State that never gets to play at Ohio State because they have so many of them. But the man was like a high 4-star coming out in 2023. So that's a trap game in App State, and then you know NC State's the same way. They should be. NC State has not won at Death Valley since 2002.
Oh
Right?
no.
Clemson should win that game, but NC State's a pretty good team. Then after that, they host Stanford. Okay, that's the only reasonably easy game they have in the first 5, and then they got to go to Tallahassee. So, I consider those four games, Georgia, um, App State, NC State, and Florida State, to be four of the toughest five, with the fifth being a road trip to Virginia Tech in the latter half of the season.
I was just going to say Virginia Tech. I think they're going to be a problem this year.
Well, they look like they could be very good.
Yeah.
And Clemson hasn't had to play at Lane Stadium with fans in the stands since 2017.
Oh wow.
So they played in 2020, but that was the game. I don't know if you guys remember it. There was nobody in the stands. Hendon Hooker was the sophomore quarterback for Virginia Tech. He was so cold that night, he couldn't get warm. Every time he went into the game, he just dropped the ball because he couldn't grip the ball. He was so cold. He had big jacket on, gloves. He couldn't get warm. He just dropped the ball every single time he went in the game. He turned it over to Clemson twice. And it isn't even fair to call them fumbles. He just dropped it. And then the sprinklers came on in the third quarter.
Yes. Yes.
And it was just the most bizarre game. So the last time they actually played in Lane Stadium with fans was 2017, and Clemson won that game pretty handily. But I've had enough nightmares of Virginia Tech owning Clemson in Blacksburg that I take that game seriously too. I'm high on the Hokies this year. I think Kyron Drones is a really good quarterback, and they have a wide receiver that I had really hoped Clemson would go after in the transfer portal last year, from Old Dominion. He was hurt most of last year, um, but he's coming back and he's really good too. The question is going to be, do they have the depth? Do they have enough talent around that they're going to be able to be competitive? But I take them seriously. So those are my top five games for Clemson, and four of them are in the first half of the season. So, and of course, that's the half of the season where Clemson is probably not going to be in sync. So I think 10-2 is realistic.
Yeah.
And you can easily say, look, Georgia's a loss. Take NC State, Florida State, and Virginia Tech. 2-1 against that group, and you're 10-2 in the regular season. If we're being a little bit more realistic and just saying, look, we still can't explain why they lost to Miami last year. We still can't explain why they were so awful against NC State. I mean, NC State had a good record, but if you watched them, they were not as good as their record indicated.
Correct.
Clemson should have won both those games. So if you have another clunker like that, then that's why I'm thinking 9-3. And like I said a little while ago, 9-3 to me would be a one-game improvement. It's a step forward. I would take that, and I know most fans probably wouldn't be happy with that. I think most fans want 10-2, and 10-2 is going to put you into the conversation for being in the ACC championship game and having a chance to play for a berth in the playoff. Now whether 10-2 will 10-2 would, with a loss to Georgia, would translate to 7-1 in the conference. With the big conference now, there are teams that have really easy schedules. Louisville got into the ACC championship game last year on a very easy schedule. They've got another easy schedule. You look at it again, the only team they play that's really projected to be at the top of the league is Clemson. Um, and NC State has a relatively easy schedule too. So even that game's really important because Clemson needs to win the tiebreaker with NC State and with Louisville. I think Louisville is a home game. Yes, I think Louisville's a home game.
Yes, it is.
So
Yep.
so those two games are critical for their chances to get into the ACC championship game to win tiebreakers. Because there's what, 17 teams in the league now, I think, and
Who knows?
three of them are west of the Mississippi. So
The
yeah,
All Coast Conference, some would say.
that has been what a lot of people have said,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we'll see how long this lasts.
Yeah.
The other big subject around Clemson, of course, is the lawsuits going on right now, and people say, oh well, they just created a series, or a game to play with East Carolina in 2029, and the first question is, who knows what anything's going to look like in 2029? Why are we even scheduling games for 2029?
Yeah.
Right.
Um, do you so with the game at Florida State and DJU, how confident do you feel about that with knowing knowing the quarterback they got? Even uh what's his face at Florida State, Norvell said, "Oh, he's a little bit better than what we thought." He said a little bit. I don't know if that's necessarily a glowing endorsement of DJ.
Right. Well, you know what? I'll go ahead and say this about DJ. Of course, I'm not an insider. I've never met the man. I've never heard anybody have a negative thing to say about DJ the man.
Mhm.
His players really loved him. I don't know how many times Dabo would go off on a tangent in a press conference talking about how great he is. And I think it's hard to say something negative about the guy. Sure, when he's throwing the ball on the ground and you're frustrated and you want to rip your hair out,
Yeah.
um, it's different. But I, like I said a little while ago, DJ is who DJ is. He's an 8 or 9 win quarterback, and what he has around him in the competition he's playing is probably going to dictate whether it's 8 or 9. I I'm not going to write off Florida State from going 10-2 this year or better. But I tell you what, they did a much better job replenishing the talent they lost on defense than they did on offense. It's
Yes.
not just at the quarterback position. It's questionable whether or not the wide receivers are going to come anywhere close to the kind of productivity they had with Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman last year. Those two guys were beasts.
Yeah.
Um, I, I used to say, and I hate to say this, the name is escaping me right now. They had a running back years ago. He played for the Vikings for a few years. I've forgotten his name now.
Oh, Dalvin Cook.
Dalvin Cook.
Yeah.
That man legitimately scared me every time we played him.
Yes.
And after seeing Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson together on the field with Jordan Travis, that was close. It took 3 of them to get me to that level of scared again. But yeah, Dalvin Cook scared the heck out of me, and that passing attack was pretty darn potent last year. I don't think they're going to come anywhere close to this. So the truth is, I call it a 50-50 shot with Florida State right now. I don't think DJU is going to have anything to do with it. I think DJ and those wide receivers are going to struggle a little bit against Clemson's defense. Yes, Avion Terrell, Shelton Lewis, and Jaden Lucas and Khalil Barnes are all sophomores of some type, but I don't think that they're going to have a problem defending. I think they're gonna make DJ think a little bit, and when you make DJ think a little bit, he gets off his game. I think the game is going to be decided by whether or not Clemson's offense can move the ball against Florida State's defense. And that's where, I'm just not sure yet because it looks like Florida State replenished on defense pretty good. And they were pretty good on defense last year. Clemson was able to move the ball and scored. I can't remember exactly how many points, but I mean, they put some points on the board against that defense. So can they do it again down in Tallahassee? That's where the question mark is. So I'm not that intimidated by Florida State's offense. I just don't know whether or not Clemson's offense is going to be able to do enough to get, put enough points on the board. This could be the equivalent. I'm probably selling both sides short. This could be the equivalent of that 2021 Georgia game that's with them and Clemson, where it's 10-3 or 13-6 or 17-10. I mean, I think the defenses are going to dominate that game, and whoever has the ball last might win. I don't know. But it's definitely one of the games I would put a question mark beside because I do respect Norvell. I do respect that defense. And like I said, DJ's not a bad quarterback. He's just not a guy that's going to win the game with his arm.
Yeah, someone you can win with, but not because of.
Correct.
Yeah.
But right now you can make the same argument about Cade Klubnik. So
Yeah.
that's where the toss up happens. I got to give them their respect because it's at Doak Campbell.
Hmm.
All right, John, we appreciate you coming on and talking to us tonight. If you're open to it, we'd love to have you on for that game in August. It's very weird to say game in August, but
I'm here for it. Let's go.
Yeah, you know what? Hey, anytime, guys. I appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. We got a couple things to close out on, but you can go ahead and get out of here, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
I appreciate it too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
All right. I'm gonna say it again, like I do every time. We really appreciate John coming on and talking to us. I feel like none of the people we have on are as excited about their teams as we are about their teams.
Hey. No, sorry. I heard screaming. So sorry. I got distracted. It's voices in my head. Or upstairs. I don't know. But I don't know. How was Michigan State? Like I couldn't. The audio on my end was kind of weird with it when you
Um,
went to West talked to him.
he wasn't overly excited.
Because somebody on a national podcast I was listening to said like they could see Michigan State if Aiden Childs does all right, seeing them going 10-2. So
Yeah,
and
no, the
me
guy
feel
we
better.
talked to was saying 6-6. He's like 6-6 is good. We're happy with the bowl game.
I mean, after the
Four and
last
eight.
couple of years from Mel Tucker, yeah, okay,
I,
I guess.
yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to watch these teams, and
Yeah.
I just wish that the people that follow these teams closer than me were as excited as I was.
Well, it makes me feel better about playing Clemson because usually it has the opposite effect of a team that Georgia's going to play. We just walk out feeling like, oh shit, why are we
Right.
confident?
This is June though.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
the hopium gets stronger
mhm.
towards August and September.
I wanted to say to him, and we'll like I said, like you mentioned, we'll probably talk to him right before the the opener, but the Georgia Clemson game, it is in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That's not a given for Georgia to win in that stadium.
It is
It's not.
not.
It's not. I mean,
No.
yeah, it's not. It's
Well,
not.
bowl games and neutral sites.
Yes, but oh yes. I mean, we're not playing Clemson ACC champion or the SEC championship, so
Yeah,
we're okay, right?
as long as it's not a conference championship game,
Or national championship.
Or
Fuck, it could happen. It could be a rematch for the national championship against Clemson. Who knows? It's in Atlanta.
it is. Um, but that's going to do it for this episode of the Nothing Finer podcast. Thank you guys for listening to us. As always, follow us on social media at nothing.finer.pod on Instagram, at finerpod on Twitter, Nothing Finer Podcast on TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. Just search us there. Go ahead and subscribe to that YouTube channel. Once we get to 50 subscribers, we can start going live and doing some cool things with that. Um, but as always, guys, remember there's nothing finer in the land.
And a drunken obnoxious Georgia fan.